no such discussion is complete without the presence of Bengali Bhadralok. And when I talk about it, I somehow remember Neeraj Choudhury from Autobiography on Unknown Indian. Just a very quick...
Check the mic is off, I see.
No, it's on.
It's on? Okay.
So, he's a kind of person who has such a... Right, he used to write such chaste English literature, who used to squat on the floor and eat machir jhol. So that is the kind of person which I see when I talk about a Bengali intellectual. And of course, we have a shared Gadrite lineage together. And we both have, both Bengalis and Punjabi have squandered their past and been too emotional about it. So the next speaker would be Samrat Choudhury, founding editor of Daily Post India. He used to be the founder editor. And he's worked with a couple of other agencies. He used to be deputy editor of Hindustan Times. Samrat, please go ahead.
Thank you. Glad to be here, to be a Punjabi among the Punjabis, even though I'm actually a small Bengali man from the northeast. I think that gives me a lot of distance to look at things as an outsider. Now, I found this topic to be very interesting, the subject of Punjabiyat. I'm coming at it as an outsider, so I'm going to look at it more from the perspective of Insaniyat. And for me, the problems of Punjab and its subalterns are similar to the problems that I have seen in Bengal or in Northeast India, or from a distance elsewhere in the world. So for example, of late, last year, it was the year of the Arab Spring. Now, to me it seemed that, what was it that actually happened? It was the year of the protester, according to Time magazine. They said it was the year of the protester because the protester didn't just hold protests. They actually changed the course of history during the course of the year. It was a very quick turnaround. The first protest in Tunisia, the vegetable vendor who self-immolated, was in December of the previous year. In the course of a year, governments had fallen around North Africa and West Asia. These protests were born of a sense of deprivation, perhaps more so a sense of relative deprivation. The fact that the protests then spread around the world and went all the way back to the heart of what I like to call the capitalist empire in Wall Street was telling, because while there may be enough reasons and more for for people to call for spring in the Arab world, there appear to be less cause for discontent in Western Europe or North America. So over there, I think it was more a case of a sense of relative deprivation rather than absolute poverty, which was pushing people to protest. Now, their slogan, "We are the 99%," was emblematic of that, because they held up the fact that 1% of the population corners the lion's share of the resources. This is true in most of the world. It's true in India as well. Over here, last year there was a survey by a company that calls itself a wealth prospecting company called WealthX. And they came out with a figure of about 8,200 people who own more than half of India's wealth. So in a country of 1.2 billion, 8,200 is not a statistically relevant figure. But that's how it is. Now, in an earlier time, this kind of disparity might have passed relatively unnoticed. This is the age of 24/7 television, the internet, seamless information flows, like never before. So in this age, when you have everybody aware of what's happening, they will be more aware of their relative deprivation than ever before. I think this is the first time in the history of the world that this is happening. And it comes on the crest of a wave of change, which actually began with the Industrial Revolution and more or less has accelerated in the last 100 years. Because if you look at the history of human civilization, you look from the start of civilization to the start of the Industrial Revolution. Generation on generation, the change was relatively little. And then suddenly things start to change. And in the last 100 years, if I think back, say for example, to my grandmother's time, and then my mother's time, and then I look at my sister, their lives are so completely different. I mean, you look at 100 years ago, and the things that surround us in our daily lives today, the way we live our lives on a daily basis, None of those things existed, Electricity was not there, pretty much, anywhere in the world. I mean, it existed as a force of nature, but electricity, lighting up bulbs didn't really happen. Piped water didn't exist. There was no internet, there were no mobile phones, there was no television, there was no motor car, there was pretty much nothing that on a day-to-day basis you do. So the way humanity lives its lives has changed completely in 100 years for men and women, but more so for women, all around the world, but especially in our part of the world. And this is a very sudden and rapid change. I mean, in the course of human civilization, 2 generations is nothing. It is the blink of two generations, 3 generations back, perhaps it had started to happen. But earlier, or even then for that matter, people were more or less attuned to living the lives that their parents had lived. So if you were born into a certain family, you pretty much grew up thinking that I'll do what my father did or what my forefathers did, more or less. Everything was decided for you. Even who you would marry was probably a factor of it was something that was decided by other people for you. It was not something you decided for yourselves. So the fact that so much change, so much choice, so much aspiration has come is very new. People have remarked about it, even as recently, I would say, as 1975, when V.S. Naipaul wrote his books about India. In India, a wounded civilization, he writes derisively about how India is not aspiration, how we have a Hindu worldview which sort of makes us, resigned to our fates, to live with poverty and so on and so forth. I see no evidence of that now. And writers writing about India now talk about how very aspirational we are. The discourse in the recent times has been about how we will do anything for money. The agitation is about corruption because everybody is trying to make his buck any which way he can. So obviously something has changed, and it has changed in the space of 25 or 30 years. So in this situation, we need to look at it from the outside. We need to recognize that change has come and very suddenly, and that what we are talking about, a lot of it, about deprivation, about relative deprivation, it's a sense eventually. And you zoom out and you see why is it happening. I think to a large extent it can be connected to the change in the understanding, the traditional understanding versus the current understanding of what is the good life. To me, this is the most important question in the world. It is an eternal philosophical quest,
Right.
but it is something that we somehow tend not to take seriously or not to look at consciously. And I think it is time now to re-examine this question, because several ideologies were defeated in between the First and Second World Wars. Communism, which remained standing, finally lost the Cold War. So since then, what you have is a situation where actually only capitalism has remained standing. So the values of capitalism are the only values that are actually really winning through in society. People may try to reclaim identity. Now, I come from the Northeast. I grew up there with the insurgencies in the Northeast. I remember a conversation I had some years back with the commander-in-chief of a militant group from the Northeast. And this was a time when change was happening there. And I told him that, people have discovered money, so your movements are doomed. And he was very upset with me. So he said, people like you are like dust on the body of India. You don't matter. I think we were both right, because now all those insurgencies are more or less finished. The insurgents themselves have gotten used to what they call ceasefires, and everybody, insurgent, politician, contractor, social worker, everybody, journalist, everybody is a part of the system. There is actually nobody who's not a part of the system, either directly or as a result of corruption. So there's nobody outside the fold in a certain sense. Everybody is in it. And it's all headed in one direction only. It's about who can live the good life as it is understood now. I think it's very simple. It's evident to everybody what is the common ground level understanding of the good life. You can illustrate it very simply. You look at popular culture, you look at music videos, you look at cinema, and you see it's very simple. It's the big car, it's the nice house, it's the flat screen television, the mobile phone, and so on and so forth. It's the products that are advertised on television or in newspapers. And that's what it's boiled down to. Now this, I think, can be contrasted with other strands which previously existed, which have now been pushed aside. For example, I can contrast it with a song from Pyasa, picturized on Guru Dutt, which was Sahil Ludhianvi's song, Ye Duniya Agar Mil Bhi Jaye To Kya Hai. So I don't think that sort of poetry would emerge now. I don't expect it to. Maybe I'm unaware of it, but I think now it would be more like, I want everything and I want it now.
Yeah.
This is, for me, looking at it as, any society, Northeast, Punjab, Bengal, the world as a whole, it's unsustainable and it's problematic. You can't, everybody wants to live the American life. Half the people here, or for that matter, in most parts of the world, want to emigrate to America. Doesn't work. And even the ones who are here want to live the American life here. Doesn't work either. The earth has certain limits, and so basically you're looking at a question of sustainability eventually. So it's not practical. So what I think is important is that we need to redefine our understanding of the good life as human beings. I think we need, because we tend to behave everywhere around the world, people behave based on the software that's installed in them. And that software comes to us from culture and ideology. Culture often is a product of religion. So I think we need a new software for living. And we need to think about it in terms of our hardware, which is ourselves as human beings.
Very well said.
About what is hardwired into us, what is it that makes all of us human. And based on that understanding, to build a new manifesto for living, which would apply to every society as human beings, to Punjabiyat and to Insaniyat.
Bravo, bravo. Any questions? It would be sad to see you leaving Punjab, but very briefly, if you can answer that. So what has been, how do you assess the good life of Punjab? Very briefly, if you can just tell us.
Same what he has defined, American.
I mean, from what I have seen as an
Right.
outsider
Right.
who's been here only for a very brief period
Right.
of time, but I mean, my office is located over a Porsche showroom,
Okay.
and they do boring business.
Right, right.
And I happened to visit a BMW showroom, and I
Right.
had to pretty much shove my way in because there were so many people.
Um,
So I mean, from what I see, it's a very materialistic culture.
Right.
And I am told that there were earlier traditions which were different and that there was a strong left,
Right,
but I
right.
have only heard about it.
Right,
I have
right.
seen nothing.
Even we have just heard about it. There's a whole story going about nostalgics talking about a past which we had or which we have created on our own. So this was a part of discussion, so I'm just mentioning that. Thanks a lot.